Today, we're talking misinformation in preservatives. Hi, I'm Alli Reed, the founder of Stratia, and welcome back. If you want to stay updated on our latest videos, be sure to hit the subscribe button. You can also follow us across social media at Stratia Skin. Today, we're going to be talking about preservatives, and this is a video I've wanted to do for a really long time because preservatives are probably the least understood aspect of skincare and the thing that has the most misinformation about it. At their most basic level, preservatives are just ingredients that prevent the growth of bacteria, mold, and yeast. And those are really important in skincare because skincare makes such a good food source for bacteria, mold, and yeast. Think about making up a smoothie and then sticking it in your bathroom cabinet at room temperature for a year. Would you want to take a big swig? So it's really important to prevent bacteria, mold, and yeast from growing in your skincare. They can cause really significant reactions in your skin if they're present. Preservatives are also really tricky because you want them to kill one type of cell, bacteria, mold, or yeast, but not another type. In other words, your skin cells. So it's really hard to find ingredients that can walk that line. There are ingredients, for example, like tea tree oil, which has great preservative effects at high percentages. It's also incredibly irritating and damaging to your skin at those percentages. Ethanol is another example. Alcohol, you can use it at 25% to really effectively preserve a product. But at 25%, alcohol really dries out your skin. It can damage your moisture barrier. So it's really hard to find preservatives that can both inhibit the growth of microbes and not damage your skin. Another difficult part of preserving skincare is that the ingredients that are really beneficial for your skin tend to be bug food, things that really feed the microbes and can make it harder to preserve, that require even more preservatives, even more robust preservatives to protect your skincare from microbial growth. All preservatives have strengths and weaknesses. Some preservatives are really great against bacteria, but they're weaker against mold. Some are great against mold, but they're not great against yeast. It's really important to have a robust preservative system that includes multiple preservatives to make sure you're sort of overlapping those strengths and weaknesses so that you're covering all your bases. There are a few types of products that don't need preservatives. The most common one is an anhydrous product. That means it doesn't have any water. Bacteria, mold, and yeast, like every living thing, need water to survive. Water brings life. So if there's no water in a product, it doesn't need a preservative because nothing can live there. High pH products also don't need preservatives. Things like bars of soap don't need preservatives. That said, high pH products aren't great for your skin in general, so that's not really a concern for most skincare products. Other than that, though, everything needs a preservative. If you don't have a preservative, it can last maybe 5 days in your fridge, and that's it. So I want to talk about all the different preservatives that Stratia uses. I could talk about all the preservatives that are on the market, but we would be here for several days and you guys are busy. So I'm just going to cover the ones that I know best, the ones that we use, go over all the research, all the misinformation, and hopefully you guys find this helpful. First up is parabens, which are probably the ingredient that have the most misinformation circulating about them of any ingredient we use in skincare. They are an incredibly powerful, really effective family of preservatives. There are a number of different parabens, all of which are a little different. At Stratia, we use methylparaben and propylparaben as our two primary preservatives for a lot of our products. Parabens are effective at really low levels. You will need less than 0.4% of parabens to completely preserve a product. Not only are they effective at such low levels, they're also super non-reactive for the skin. You remember I mentioned it's hard to find preservatives that are effective against microbes but don't hurt your skin. The American Contact Dermatitis Society actually named parabens their 2019 non-allergen of the year, which means they are super well tolerated and hypoallergenic for a huge range of skin types. So let's talk about the bad rap that parabens have. For the most part, it comes from a single misinterpreted study from 2004 that found parabens in breast cancer tissue. Let's go through exactly why this study is not necessarily something we need to worry about when we're talking about parabens in cosmetics. This study had a really small sample size. It only tested 20 people, which is incredibly small for most scientific studies. The study did not test healthy breast tissue, so we don't know if parabens are found in all of our tissues or if there's any link whatsoever to breast cancer. And actually, the authors of the studies called that out in their study, saying there is no causal link that we've found between parabens and breast cancer tissue, just that they coexist together. And I think most importantly, there were equivalent levels of parabens found in their controls, which contained zero biological matter whatsoever, which means that those parabens could have come from the cleaner that they used on the glassware. It could have come from the hand cream that the scientists were using as they took these samples. There's really no reason to believe that these parabens were even found in the breast tissue itself. It was a really flawed study and one that the authors themselves never intended to be an indictment of parabens used in cosmetics. There's also a rumor going around that parabens are endocrine disruptors, that they have estrogenic activity that can impact your hormone levels. There have been a number of studies about that, all of which have been on rats who either ate or were injected with pure parabens. In those cases, at worst, the most estrogenic paraben, butylparaben, was shown to be 100,000 times weaker than estrogen. And even then, we need to keep in mind that there is such a huge difference between eating or injecting something and putting it on your face. When you eat something, when you inject something, the point of it is that your body takes it and distributes it throughout your entire body. Your skin exists for the sole purpose of keeping the outsides out and the insides in, and it is very good at its job. So when you put something on your skin, very little of it gets into your body. There's actually no blood flow whatsoever to your epidermis. So there's such a huge difference between eating or injecting something and putting it on your skin. Beyond that, all of these studies used 100% pure parabens, which are 4,000 times more concentrated than what you would be using on your skin. So a question I get a lot is, the studies are flawed, that parabens are maybe much too weak of endocrine disruptors to be any issue, but isn't it just safer to not use them at all? So if all of this information points to parabens being completely safe for use in cosmetics, why are all these cosmetics companies going paraben-free? It comes down to marketing. It comes down to selling products, that they are preying on your fear. And it's a really genuine, authentic fear. We don't want to be using products that are going to harm our health. And that's completely understandable. Where the disconnect comes is that using that fear can sell products. So companies are preying on that fear in order to market their products, that saying something is paraben-free is an easy way to make you feel like you're using something safer, even if that isn't actually true. It's also just a lot harder to educate people about all of the science behind parabens than it is to just reformulate your product, even if the reformulated product is not going to be as effective or as well preserved. Next up is another pretty controversial ingredient, which is diazolidinyl urea. It's a mouthful. It's a formaldehyde releaser, which sets off some alarm bells for us. We know that formaldehyde can be a carcinogen. It can cause a lot of irritation. So why do we use it in cosmetics? Formaldehyde releasers work by releasing a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of formaldehyde over time, which inhibits the growth of bacteria, mold, and yeast. Studies have indicated that that formaldehyde actually evaporates away between the time you pump it and put it on your skin. So why do we keep using formaldehyde releasers? The most important thing to keep in mind, and this can be a difficult thing to sort of emotionally digest, but the dose makes the poison. This is true for everything. Water can be a poison if you drink too much of it, and there are perfectly safe levels of cyanide. The formaldehyde exposure you're getting from cosmetics that use formaldehyde releasers are so microscopic that it's essentially equivalent to the formaldehyde you would get from eating a medium-sized pear. Formaldehyde is naturally created in your body through a number of biological processes. It's something we coexist with all the time and we can handle perfectly fine in very low levels. Next, let's talk about some of the lesser-known preservatives that Stratia uses. The next up is iodopropenyl butyl carbamate, which is an antifungal. It, similar to formaldehyde releasers, in large quantities can be an irritant, can be toxic. In Stratia products, it appears at less than 0.0025%. It is just there to round out some of the preservative blend. You know how I mentioned that some preservatives are stronger against bacteria, but weaker against mold. This is something that is just going to be really good at filling in those gaps for mold. Its final safety assessment, which is done by the Cosmetic Ingredient Review and is available online, compiled 32 different studies on this ingredient and discovered that it showed 0 signs of irritation or sensitization. Next up is a preservative that's actually used a lot in clean cosmetics, potassium sorbate. This is an ingredient that is also really good against mold and yeast, but it has quite low activity against bacteria. We use potassium sorbate in Velvet cleansing milk because Velvet cleansing milk is often used in showers or in really damp and humid situations that put it at higher risk for mold and yeast growth than other products. We add it into our already robust preservative blend to make sure it's extra strong against mold. Since we're already using a clean preservative, why not just use it in all our products? Well, potassium sorbate has a few major drawbacks. First is that it is only effective at low pHs, under a pH of about 5. Sorbic acid is actually the ingredient that's preventing mold growth, and so the higher the pH, the less free sorbic acid there is to be doing its preservative work. Beyond that, in higher percentages, potassium sorbate can actually cause really significant skin irritation. We use it at about 0.2% because we're only using it to augment our already robust preservative system. When you're using potassium sorbate as your primary preservative, you're using it at levels more like 0.5 to 1%, which doesn't sound like a huge difference, but that's up to 5 times more than we're currently using, and that can cause really significant skin irritation. And the last preservative we use, disodium EDTA, which I think is an ingredient that's beloved across the board, to be honest. Those metal ions that are floating around in a formula can actually react with ingredients in the formula, deactivating actives, spoiling products, causing oils to go rancid. So disodium EDTA inactivates those ions and helps make sure that the preservatives are working at their full capacity. So why doesn't Stratia use some of those clean preservatives? I'm not defending parabens and formaldehyde releasers because I use them. I use them because I love them. I have been a paraben proponent since long before I started Stratia. And I want to clarify, most preservative systems are all fairly inexpensive, so it's never a budget issue when you choose one preservative over another. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, preservatives are really tricky because they need to kill some cells, bacteria, mold, and yeast, but not others like skin cells, so it can be really hard to find ingredients that walk that line. Most newer preservatives need to be used at really high levels and do not walk that line as well as parabens and formaldehyde releasers. In addition, these newer clean preservatives have not been tested nearly as much as parabens have. Parabens have such a bad reputation that they get tested and tested and tested and tested. There is so much scientific data backing up the proof that parabens are completely harmless when used in cosmetics at the levels we use them. Newer replacement preservatives also just tend to be less effective than the preservatives we already have. And that means you need to formulate your product to be easier to preserve. And that means less bug food. Bug food can be things like plant extracts, like amino acids, like humectants like glycerin, things that are so good for your skin, you need to cut back on them because your preservative can't handle inhibiting the microbial growth that can come out of it. There's also this idea I want to touch on of mundane versus exotic risk. And this is something that affects all of us in our lives, that we tend to give more weight to an exotic risk versus a mundane risk. Mundane risks are things that are so common that they almost feel like we can look past them, whereas exotic risks feel so scary because they are so unusual. Think about going to swim in the ocean. It feels a lot scarier that you're going to get eaten by a shark than you would be pulled out by a tide and drown, even though you're much more likely to get caught in a tide. The same thing applies to cosmetics and to preservatives. People put a lot more weight into the exotic risk of a preservative potentially causing cancer or disrupting their endocrine activity versus the relatively mundane but much more realistic and common risk of putting mold on your face, of harboring bacteria growing in your cream. So I think it's important to use the best, most effective, safest preservatives out there. And it has been proven time and again that those are things like parabens and formaldehyde releasers. I hope this was helpful. It's one of my favorite things to do, is to dive into misinformation and help to clear things up around the science of skincare. If you have any ideas for what I should tackle on my next video, please comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media at Stratia Skin. I'll see you next time.